So first, I just want to thank everyone for being here today. So just some quick housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and I'll be posting it along with the slides on our webpage. So please don't feel like you have to write everything down or process everything all at once right now. Um, my name is Karen Gravlin, and I am the library consultant for inclusive services with the Vermont Department of Libraries, and I'm also the director of the Able Library. So just a quick verbal description of me. I have brown hair past my shoulders, pale skin and brown eyes. I'm wearing a gray sweater and I have a headset on. My background is blurred, so you can't really see anything behind me. On the slide, it says Able Library, then spells out what Able stands for, which is audio, braille, large print, and electronic books. And there's a photo of a woman sitting against a tree and smiling as she listens to a device on her headphones. All right. So today I plan to take you through an overview of the Able Library, what it is, what we provide, some of its history, and who we serve. I'll also talk about some of the programs and projects that we run. And this slide has our agenda for today, which I just briefly summarized, as well as a photo of a young boy reading Braille. You're welcome to participate in a way that feels comfortable for you. You can use the chat. I'll try to monitor that, unmute yourself or turn on your video. Whatever way is easiest for you works for me. And of course, I'll leave time for questions at the end, but please feel free to stop me at any point if you have something you'd like to ask or if you need me to clarify anything. And it's a little difficult because it's hard for me to, I'm like juggling multiple screens, but I will do my best. So before I talk about the Able Library, I just want to go over some statistics about some of the people that we serve in Vermont and who we don't serve. Not every disability we talk about on this slide makes someone eligible to use the Able Library. So you can see in the first image on this slide, which is an outline of Vermont with 4 human figures in it, and one of them is orange, um, that over 126,000 adults in our state have a disability, which is equal to 24% or about 1 in 4 adults. And this might be kind of shocking for some of you who haven't heard these numbers before, but I do want to mention that not everyone who has a disability thinks of themselves as having one. For instance, there are people who use a cane or walker who don't necessarily think of themselves as having a disability. Likewise, there are people who use hearing aids who don't consider themselves as having a disability. This data, which is from the CDC, is further broken down into what the CDC calls functional disability types. So this information is outlined in the second part of the image, which is a bar graph. And it shows that 9% of adults in Vermont have a mobility disability, which means that they have serious difficulty walking or climbing stairs. 12% have a cognitive disability, which means serious difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions. 6% have a disability that affects their ability to live independently, which means that they have serious difficulty doing errands alone, such as visiting a doctor's office. 5% have a hearing disability, which refers to deafness or serious difficulty hearing. 3% have a visual disability, which means that they're blind or have serious difficulty seeing even when wearing glasses. And 3% have a disability that affects self-care, which means difficulty dressing or bathing. Um, I also just want to mention the possibility of intersectionality. So in many cases, there are people who have more than one disability that fall into different functional disability types. Someone may have a mobility disability and also be blind. So it's possible for someone to fall into multiple categories. And so the previous information was just about adults. For children, the Vermont Agency of Education reported that almost 14,000 students ages 5 through 21 had an individual education plan in 2021, which is approximately 17% of all students enrolled in public schools in Vermont. That means that these students had a disability that had an adverse effect on their ability to learn and were eligible for special education. For context, Vermont's total public school enrollment was just over 80,000 students for the 2021-2022 school year. Why is all of this important to know? Um, so because you're already serving people with disabilities, whether you realize it or not, and knowing who you serve can help you find ways to be more inclusive and accessible for your community. I also think that being aware of the prevalence of disability can help people recognize that making accommodations for folks should be the norm and not the exception. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with the ABLE Library, we serve Vermonters of all ages with a visual or physical impairment that prevents them from reading standard print material. We also serve people with print disabilities like dyslexia. So, we're a network library for the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, also known as NLS, and I'll be referring to them a lot that way. And it's a national program through the Library of Congress. So every state in the country, and even some territories like Puerto Rico and Guam, have at least one network library that distributes NLS materials to their residents. And one of the nice things about having a network like this is if one of our patrons moves to another state, we can send that state's library the patron's information, and they can continue to receive the same service that they do here in Vermont and vice versa. So on the slide, there's a photo of a digital talking book machine and cartridges, as well as a photo of a smartphone with a Bard app on it, and a photo of someone reading Braille. So the Able Library, we have 3 staff members that serve the entire state. So there's me, and as the director, I do a lot of the outreach, training, developing partnerships, and sort of taking care of any operational issues that come up. Sarah Blow is our reader's advisor. So she provides customer service to patrons by handling circulation and reference requests over the phone and through email. She also does the majority of the collection maintenance for our large print collection. And Wendy Clark is our assistant librarian. And just like Sarah, she provides customer service to our patrons. She's also our cataloger and manages our local recording program, which I'll talk about more in just a little bit. So we have materials in several different accessible formats for patrons, but our most popular format is digital audiobooks on cartridges, which require a special digital machine from the NLS to play back. So if patrons choose this reading format when they sign up for service with us, we send the patron a machine. So when a patron signs up with us, they let us know what favorite authors, genres, or subjects they enjoy reading, and we include all of that in their profile on our integrated library system, or ILS. We have a special ILS that was made specifically for libraries for the blind and print disabled, which most of the network libraries around the country use. It's called CLAS, and that's one of the ways that makes it easy for us to transfer patrons between states. Um, so every night, our ILS creates a list of patrons who have returned books or requested new ones, and it pulls their reading preferences from their profile. We come to work in the morning. What we do is we upload the books onto cartridges and get them sent in the mail out to our patrons. We can fit about 8 books onto one cartridge, and we often mail out multiple cartridges to a patron to make sure that they never run out of books to read so that they can listen to one, put it in the mail, and still have one to listen to while they wait for the next cartridge to come. But that's all based on patron preferences. We do have some patrons who only want 1 or 2 books on a cartridge, and that's perfectly fine. We sort of just tailor it to whatever the patron is comfortable with. And on the slide, you can see a picture of the kind of machine we use to upload the books onto the cartridges. And the machine is called a scribe. So we can create multiple cartridges at a time, which makes preparing the books to go out that much easier for us. Um, One of the main advantages of having the books on digital cartridges is that patrons don't have to wait for a book. So because they're digital, we can put the same book on as many cartridges as we need to so that everyone who wants that book at the same time can get it. And that also means that patrons don't have to feel like they're keeping a book from someone if they take a little longer to read it. So there are no waiting lists for any of our audiobooks, which is it's very different from the lending model that most public libraries are used to with ebooks on platforms like Overdrive. So I just wanted you to be aware that we don't have those same sorts of restrictions. We also have a small collection of print braille picture books for our patrons to check out. So these books generally have the braille, the standard print, and the pictures included. They're sometimes called all-in-ones or three-in-ones, and there's a picture of one on the slide. These are great for braille readers who want to read with young children or for children who are just learning braille. They're also useful for making people aware of what Braille is and what it feels like. I found that if you put a Braille book in front of someone, whether they're sighted or not, they want to touch it and experience Braille for themselves, which is it's really cool to be able to offer that to people. For Braille readers who want a larger variety, because like I said, we only have maybe 300 of these, 200, 300 of these. Um, or for those who want adult books, we actually contract with the Perkins Library in Massachusetts, which is part of the Perkins School for the Blind, and they send our patrons Braille books in the mail for free. Um, we do this because we just don't, Braille books are huge. They take up a ton of room. I think it's the last book in the Harry Potter series is one book in print, but I think it's like between 7 and 10 volumes in Braille. So we just don't have the room to carry that many Braille books. Um, so it's great that we can partner with Perkins to provide those books. And we're not the only state who uses Perkins to send Braille books. I think New Hampshire and Maine also use the Braille service through them. And while we're talking about Braille, I just want to quickly mention that we don't teach people Braille here at the Able Library. Our materials are generally meant for people who already know Braille or for those who are learning Braille through a different avenue. We sometimes have patrons who request Braille learning materials, and we typically direct those patrons to one of our partner organizations in the state. The Vermont Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired have teachers and teaching materials available to assist people. We just don't have the capacity for that at our library. The Able Library also offers large print books to our patrons, and there's a picture of a couple of our large print books on the slide. As far as I know, we have the largest large print collection in the state with over 10,000 titles, and they include books for children, teens, and adults. We recently used some ARPA grant money to refresh this collection, so we have a lot of newer books and replaced some of our older, more worn out copies. We're also working on making sure that our children and teen books are more current. So we're trying to carry as many of the Golden Dome and Green Mountain Book Award books as we can. It's unfortunately not always possible because publishers don't always publish books in large print. So we kind of just take what we can get. Um, but if patrons have some vision and prefer reading print, or if they have a reading disability like dyslexia, large print books might be a good option for them. The print is usually 16-point font or larger, and there's more space between the lines of text, which can be helpful for people with certain reading disabilities. For patrons who use tablets or smartphones, we offer the BARD app, which stands for Braille and Audio Reading Download. So with BARD, patrons can download Braille and audiobooks directly to their mobile device. It's convenient for patrons because they don't have to wait for the mail to get a book, and they can listen to the books without the special player. And just like with the digital cartridges, there's no waiting. If a book is listed in Bard, you can download it and listen to it regardless of whether or not someone else has it downloaded. We also have a small collection of audio described DVDs, a few of which are shown on the slide. So these are DVDs where someone describes all of the visual elements, so things like the background, the costumes, and the characters, without disrupting the actual dialogue of the movie. Um, so we're not adding to this collection right now, but it is available for patrons who still prefer DVDs over streaming services. I will say that a lot of streaming services offer audio description, so that's something to keep in mind as well if you have patrons who maybe mention that this is something that they use or need. If you have Netflix or Amazon Prime, you'll see a symbol near the closed caption symbol that says AD, and that means that there's audio description available, and you can actually listen to it yourself. It's pretty interesting to hear what it's like to have everything described to you. And our newest collection is our Accessible Youth Collection, which we were able to start with grant money from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So this collection features high contrast picture books and board books. And there's a picture of a high contrast book on the slide. It's the one furthest to the right. So the leading cause of blindness and low vision for children in the US is a condition called cerebral visual impairment, which is generally a problem with how the eyes talk to the brain. So there's not necessarily anything wrong with the actual eyes themselves, but just how the information is processed. So high contrast pictures are easier for children with CVI to see because there's less information that needs to travel between the brain and the eyes. These books may also be helpful for children with other reading disabilities because the illustrations are usually much simpler and less distracting. We're also offering Wonder Books, which are picture books and chapter books with an audio element attached to the book. So I think of them as sort of the next generation of the picture books that come with the cassettes or the CDs in the back. So kids can listen to the audio as they flip through the book. These are also great for grandparents or parents who have a print disability but still want to read with their children. They can use these books to listen together as the child flips through the pictures, which is a great way to encourage family literacy. So if you look at the picture of the Wonder Book on the slide, it's the one closest to the text. You can see the audio player is attached to the inside cover of the book, and patrons can just press the play button and start listening. You can also plug in headphones so kids can listen to the books in the library without disturbing other patrons. And we've recently had a patron who is blind tell us that she reads these books with her 2-year-old, and her daughter already recognizes the sound that it makes when it's telling you to turn the page, and the 2-year-old is already knows to turn the page. So they're relatively easy to use even for young readers. And the decodable books, which I don't have a picture of on the slide, these are a lot like beginning readers, but they really focus heavily on phonics. So usually what happens in these books is let the letters make the same sound throughout the entire book. So the letter I might make an I sound like in hit, bit, fit, which makes reading a little less tricky because the reader isn't having to guess which sound the I is making in that particular word. So in other words, in the book, they're easily decoded by sounding them out. And these books are used with kids who have reading disabilities as they're learning to read, although I do think they're helpful for most children who are learning to read. So these books, the decodable books, are still being processed and added to the catalog right now, but we hope to make them available soon. Able patrons can request any of these formats either in their initial application or just by calling and letting us know that these are the books that they want to start getting from us. They're also available through interlibrary loan through Clover and can be requested in the same way as other ILL items. So why do we use these special formats? The first and main reason is simply for accessibility. So the different formats we provide can be more accessible for people depending on the type of disability that they have. But another important reason is copyright. So NLS is exempt from some copyright law thanks to legislation that Congress passed. So this gives them the right to record print material into an audio format and translate it into Braille without needing to get permission from publishers or pay any fees. And then on top of that, the US became a full participant in the Marrakesh Treaty in 2019. And the Marrakesh Treaty lets similar library services in other countries share their materials with us and vice versa. And that's great because our patrons now have access to audiobooks and braille books in other languages from, I think it's 81 other countries at this point, which the National Library Service wouldn't have been able to produce on its own. Um, but these special privileges mean that we are required by law to make sure that only people who qualify for this service have access to these materials. So that's why we have an application process, and that's also why we have special formats that not everyone can use. So if a patron accidentally loses a digital cartridge, it's not playable by any standard machines. You can't play it on your stereo or in your car. You need the digital player from NLS to listen to them. And there's one shown on the slide. And only qualified patrons receive access to BARD as well. And there's a picture of what the BARD app looks like on a phone on the slide. And this just helps to prevent misuse of the service and keeps us in the clear with copyright laws. So how does NLS make the books? NLS, they have their own collection development department, and the librarians who work in that department decide which books to produce based on what they know patrons will be interested in, as well as direct requests from patrons and network libraries like us. So the book selection process is pretty similar to what public libraries do. They just try to anticipate what patrons will want, but they just do it on a national level. So at the Able Library, we can send in our suggestions, but ultimately the decision on what to add to the collection rests with the National Library Service. So after books are selected, narrators come into NLS's recording studios and they record the audiobooks, and there's a picture on the slide of someone narrating a book. They're required to read the entire book from cover to cover. NLS isn't allowed to make any changes to what is in the text of the book, which is why sometimes we hear from patrons like, why do I have to listen to the copyright information at the beginning of the book every time? That's why, because they can't leave it out. So once they're done narrating, the NLS staff edits the audio tracks. They encrypt the file so that it's only accessible to eligible users, and then they upload the file to their database, and that's when network libraries like us can copy them onto cartridges to send out to patrons, or patrons can download them directly onto their devices through the BARD app. One of like the recent things that's been happening is e-audiobooks have become more popular with the general public, which means that NLS has started purchasing commercially produced audiobooks to add to their collection through special agreements that they have with some publishers. And that's great because it means that patrons don't have to wait the months that it can sometimes take for NLS to record the audio version of a print book. A lot of the time now, publishers release the print and audiobooks at the same time. So new books are accessible to patrons almost right away in some cases, which is great. For Braille books, it works much the same. Once a book is selected to be brailled, NLS producers braille copies of books both in physical and digital formats. Digital braille can be downloaded by patrons on BARD. So I do want to briefly talk about the history of the National Library Service so you have an idea of how it's evolved over the years. I'm not going to go every point here, so I'm just going to pull out some of the more important points. So the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled began in 1931 with an act that was passed in Congress to establish the service. And I like to mention this because since NLS was created through legislation, it can be a challenge to change certain aspects of the service. A lot of the time, the change would require new legislation to be passed in Congress. And I think we can all agree that sometimes that seems almost impossible. And what that means is that our library service is governed by laws put into place by Congress, and we don't always have the authority to change some of our policies, like how or who we provide services to, which can be tough to explain to patrons who are used to using public libraries. And I just wanted you all to be aware of that there are certain things that we don't choose, that we're just following the law that was passed by Congress. So in the beginning, the NLS only provided books in raised letters, and they only served adults. But in 1933, audiobooks, which were also called talking books, were developed on records. And I'll just say here that audiobooks are sometimes more popular with people who have visual impairments because not everyone learns Braille. Some people don't have access to someone who can teach them. Some people lose their vision later in life, and learning a new way of reading might be difficult for them. And even now, there are some parents who don't necessarily think that their children need to learn Braille because they can access everything digitally with text to voice options. So the development of audiobooks really provided access and continues to provide access to a lot of people who otherwise would not be able to read. In 1976, Vermont joined the NLS network and created the Vermont Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped, which was called the Special Services Unit with the Department of Libraries. We were the second to last state to join the network. And in 2006, NLS began its transition to digital formats, which is essentially what we use today. So here in Vermont, we don't circulate records or cassette tapes anymore. Our entire audiobook collection is digital. So, because of the special legislation that allows NLS to exist and provide these library services to people with disabilities, patrons do have to have a qualifying condition in order to use the ABLE library. So, the library is meant to serve people with disabilities, and those disabilities fall into four different categories. The first category is blindness. If someone is legally blind, they can be an ABLE library patron. The next category is other visual disabilities. So someone might not be blind, but they might still have trouble reading regular print due to issues with their vision. So that would also be a qualifying condition. The third category is physical disabilities that prevent someone from being able to read standard print. And the way I usually explain that is if you have a condition that makes it difficult for you to hold a book or turn its pages, you can use the library. And that might be anything from arthritis to a car accident or Parkinson's. There are lots of reasons why someone might have trouble physically handling books. Um, and the last category is reading disabilities, which is kind of an umbrella term for any disability that makes reading difficult. I usually point to dyslexia as one of the more obvious ones. These conditions can be temporary or permanent. So, for example, if a patron has a stroke, they can qualify for service until they've regained enough mobility to read standard print materials again, and then they can discontinue service. On the other hand, a patron might have a lifelong condition and be an able patron for years. So when a patron fills out an application for the ABLE library, there is a section that requires a signature from what we call a certifying authority. So the certifying authority is signing the application to say that the person applying does have a condition that qualifies. In the past, the only people who could certify an application were doctors and other medical professionals, but the National Library Service recently changed that so that teachers, social workers, and librarians like yourselves um, can all sign and certify applications. And there's the full list of people who can sign an application is on our website if you're interested. So if you have a patron who you know has a certifying condition, you can sign their application instead of having to send them to their doctor to get it signed. And I try to mention this all the time as well. Please reach out to us if you have questions about whether or not a condition qualifies. We realize certainly it can feel invasive to talk about personal health information with patrons. So please send us an email or give us a call if you're unsure. We also contact every single patron who sends an application to us. So we do a final screening before their application is officially accepted, and we can handle those situations as they come up. Um, I would rather us get an application from someone who may not qualify than to have someone decide not to fill out an application because they weren't sure and end up not getting library services. So, in addition to providing library materials, we also run programs. We currently have an adult book club that meets every other month. We meet on Microsoft Teams, and just like Zoom, for people who don't have internet or a computer or don't like using that technology, patrons can also just call in. You can see a photo of the cover of the book Bewilderment, which was one of our recent books. Um, we also co-host a program called Memorable Times Cafe with the Central Vermont Council on Aging, and that meets online on the first Wednesday of every month. This program is meant for people living with memory loss to attend with their care partner. And we usually have a theme to help sort of prompt conversation. So one month it was Stick Around, and we talked about sports that involved a bat or a stick, which is why there's a photo of two young children playing with a baseball and a bat. We usually have music that's associated with the theme that we think patrons will recognize as well, which can be really fun for people. Um, for younger patrons, we offer a summer reading program. So pictured on the slide is one of the CSLP's All Together Now artworks. It's a girl lying down on her stomach and reading a book. And for the first time this past summer, the National Library Service provided virtual programming for our patrons to attend over the summer. So we had story time with Dr. Carla Hayden, the Librarian of Congress, as well as musical programs and author talks. So that was a lot of fun for patrons. So public libraries are eligible to sign up with the Able Library for what we call an institutional account. One of our biggest services to public libraries are our large print deposit collections. So we send libraries boxes of large print books that they can keep for 3 months to circulate. Oops, it sounds like maybe we can hear some folks.
Yes.
Let me see if I can. There we go. Sorry about that. So our large print deposit collections, libraries can get boxes of large print books from us that they can keep for 3 months and circulate to their own patrons. And then they send them back to us and we send them more. So we create profiles for libraries just like we do for individual patrons, and we can tailor the books we send based on what you think your patrons will be interested in. So libraries can also request specific books to be included in their deposit collection. That can be a great option for libraries who are doing book discussions and want maybe a large print copy of the book that they're doing for that month's discussions for their patrons to have. And so some libraries get 6 books at a time, some get 50. It really just depends on what your library decides, whether or not you have the space for that many books. And then you keep the books for 3 months, circulate them to your patrons, send them back to us, and we send you a fresh set of books. Another thing I like to mention is that when you are getting a large print deposit collection from us, you don't have to restrict who checks out the books from your deposit collection. We do not expect you to make sure that only eligible people with eligible disabilities use the books. In a lot of ways, I think it's helpful for people who may not currently have a reading disability to be exposed to the large print. They can help spread the word to people they know who might benefit from large print. And I also think that it just helps to normalize other reading formats for people. We also support public libraries who are serving patrons with print disabilities. So we're happy to answer any questions about ways to make your programming more accessible or what kinds of collections you might possibly provide to patrons. We can brainstorm with you on how to make your physical space or website more accessible. We don't always have all the answers, but we can point you in the right direction or give you resources. So if you have any questions about serving patrons with print disabilities, you can definitely reach out to us. And at the end of the day, I view the Able Library as an extension of your library's services. So even when you're helping someone sign up for service with us, they're still your patron too. I really feel that it's a partnership between the public library and the Able Library to provide library services that meet our patrons' needs. So you might already have a large print collection, but still want to use large print deposit collections from us to rotate new books through. Your patron might still really like your audiobooks, but use us to get access to some that you don't necessarily have in your collection. Patrons might still go to your programming. So I think however a patron feels comfortable using our libraries is great, as long as we're giving them options and making sure that they have access to library services. So And I just wanted to mention some of the other projects that are ongoing at the Able Library and with the National Library Service. Right now, NLS is working to distribute Braille e-readers to interested patrons. So patrons can download a digital Braille book onto their Braille e-reader and read it. So you might be wondering what a Braille e-reader is. I think of it as a Kindle, but for Braille. And the only way to make it so that people can feel the Braille dots is to have a movable display. So it looks like a small keyboard, and one of the models is pictured on the slide so you can get an idea of what it looks like. So if you can see, the little white dots on the Braille e-reader can all move to display different letters. So when you upload a book to the Braille e-reader, it displays the first 20 characters of the book, and then the reader hits the next button, and then it displays the next set of 20 characters. One of the other features of this is that you can plug it into your computer or you can plug it into your smartphone and then be able to read um, website text, emails, even text messages. Um, so we don't have a lot of Braille readers here in Vermont who use the Able Library, but the ones who do and who are interested have already received the new Braille e-readers and are learning how to use them. Um, and this is a huge service that NLS is providing with this new equipment because the e-readers are really expensive to purchase commercially. I think that some of them are around $2,000 each. Um, so it's really exciting to make them available to our patrons. And the eventual goal that NLS has is to send out Braille e-readers to any NLS patron who wants one. NLS also has a newer program called Braille on Demand. So our patrons can request up to 5 books a month in hard copy Braille. And NLS works with Braille printers to produce the books, and then the books are sent to the patron free of charge. And the really cool thing about that program is that these books can be kept by the patron forever. So they don't have to return them to the National Library Service or to us. These are meant for patrons to be able to keep. And part of the reasoning behind that is that Braille literacy is a big focus for the National Library Service. And so any way that they can find to put Braille into the hands of people who read Braille is 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 something that they are interested in doing. Um, Another pilot program that the National Library Service is working on is using voice user interface to allow for playback of audiobooks on devices like Alexa, which may be useful for patrons who have difficulty operating a digital machine or mobile device with, like dexterity issues. And they have 400 patrons who are currently testing out that technology, and we're hopeful that they'll be rolling out this service sometime next year. And then here at the Able Library, we have a local recording program which allows us to record books ourselves. So we typically choose titles of Vermont interest. So books by a Vermont author, books about Vermont, books that are set in Vermont. And usually these are books that we know the National Library Service won't produce themselves because there just isn't a national interest for those titles. Um, a lot of the books we choose to produce are probably only interesting to Vermonters or someone who's really interested in Vermont. So our narrators are just volunteers, and we have a recording studio here at the Department of Libraries. We also have at-home recording equipment that we purchased a couple of years ago, so that our volunteers can actually record books at home. So we upload the audiobooks created at Able onto the national database. So patrons across the country do have access to the books that we record here. Um, we're obviously not the only state who does this. So, Connecticut, they run a very similar program where they record books of Connecticut interest. And so we all sort of share them and make them available to the rest of the country. Um, We rely very heavily on our partnerships for patron referrals and to spread awareness about our services. We work with most of our patrons remotely because our patrons live all over the state and they may not have access to transportation to visit our library. So we don't very often get to help folks in person. And it's really our partners who do work directly with people that are often how our patrons learn about us in the first place. So obviously, public and school libraries are always great partners in sharing our resources with patrons and helping patrons apply for service. We also partner with other organizations that serve people with disabilities, like the Vermont Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired. They refer folks to us all the time, and we share their resources with our patrons as well. But one of our biggest partners that I always like to mention is United States Postal Service. So our physical materials get to our patrons through the mail, which we can send at no cost thanks to a postal program called Free Matter for the Blind or Handicapped. So it's actually paid for through an appropriation in Congress. And instead of a stamp, we print Free Matter for the Blind or Handicapped on whatever we're mailing, and it gets mailed for free to our patron. And then it's also free for patrons and libraries returning materials to us through the mail. Um, so without this program, I think it would be too costly for us to mail books out. So even our large print deposit collections, when we mail those out to public libraries, those get sent to you through Free Matter for the Blind. And then when you send them back to us, you don't pay postage. You just put them back in the box that we sent them to you in, and it comes back to us for free as well. Right. So that is my brief overview of the Able Library. Does anyone have any questions, comments, suggestions? Are we doing okay? Is there something we could be doing that we're not?